Limited. I'm Jillian Fernandes, the Investor Relations Representative for the company, and it's my pleasure to introduce James Davies, Executive Chairman, and Alistair Beard, Chief Financial Officer, as well as members of the Kiland Board to provide a summary of the December 2024 quarterly results. Please feel free to ask a question at any time during the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. This session is designed to provide an opportunity to answer any questions on the update or Kiland's broader business operations. James will firstly begin with providing an update, followed by a short Q&A session. James, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jillian, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the call. Today, I thought I'd just touch on three sort of fairly high-level parts of the business that were particularly relevant to our operations during the quarter. I'll firstly just run through the operations themselves and some of the changes we're making in terms of capacity. I'll talk a little bit about the sale of our property, Kiland, and then I'll give everybody a brief update on Revi and the biochar and carbon credit operation. So with respect to the harvest and remediation works, you'll see from the report that we harvested about 338 hectares, stacked 495, and stump ground about 380 hectares. Those numbers are fairly low, both historically and in the context of what we're trying to achieve. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to address that, which I did flag, I think, in the AGM late last year. Just before I get straight into that, I'd also just touch on the koala management plan. One of the reasons we were slow during the quarter was the two properties that we were focused on, which is Trethui and Dual, down in the south. Both those properties had a significant area of unburnt plantations, which attracted a lot of koalas and just impacted the rate at which we could get through the harvest process. But overall, the koala management plan metrics were good. 904 spotted. I think we had about 12% near misses, 1 injury and 0 deaths, which, given the density and frequency with which we were encountering koalas, is a very good result. So with respect to operations, as I say, we did flag this at the AGM. In December, or in the back end of last year, but really all the machines arrived during December. We bought 2 new harvesters. Both of those are tracked harvesters, so we've been operating with wheeled harvesters to date. So the new ones have Caterpillar tracks. They are a little bit slower to move around, but are much more resilient to operating in wet conditions. So to the extent we encounter conditions that the wheeled harvesters have found difficult, we'll be able to send those machines in and sort of, if you like, do the jobs on a more one and done basis and not be so dependent on having to shift machines around depending on the conditions. We also bought 3 more skidders. So they will, I think we've now got a total of 7 skidders operating across the estate. We are currently skidding for those who know the estate, the southwest corner of McGill, which was one of the first areas we harvested. At that stage, we weren't laying down the trees in a manner that was really optimal for the skidders themselves. So getting through that block of the estate is going to be slow, but once we're through it, we'll be back into the sort of the new regime of how we lay the trees down, and you'll see those productivity numbers pick up significantly. And we would hope over the next few months we'll start to see those numbers of sort of 120 up to 150 hectares per month. Certainly add 100 to those, possibly even double towards 300 a month. It does take a bit of ramping up, and as part of the expansion, we've put on approximately 50 staff, and we'll be double shifting certainly a couple of the harvesters and some of the skidders and the stump grinders as well. All of those will now experience double shifts. We've put on 20 new staff to add that capacity. But as new staff come on, it does take a few months for them to get up to the sort of levels of productivity we need. And that's just a function of getting trained and familiar with the equipment itself. The other thing that sort of slowed us up a little bit in the December quarter was just machine uptime. That's probably an area best described as continuous improvement. It's not something we can just solve. We have looked to increase the number of spares that we hold in inventory, which means that when machines do break down, we will hopefully be more likely to have parts at hand. Obviously, getting parts to Kangaroo Island can be a slower process than in other parts of the estate. And as well as holding more spares, we're also doing a bit of a risk assessment on spares to see which ones would really sort of critical to operations and hold those on hand. But as I say, it is an area of continuous improvement. You can't predict these things with any sort of definitiveness. So that's operations. So as I say, hopefully we'll see some of the productivity numbers and just the overall numbers of cleared, stacked and ground hectares increase over the course of the next 6 months. The second major thing that happened during the quarter was that we successfully completed the sale of Kiland to a new charity called the Koala Sanctuary. Kiland, again, for those who know the estate, was the only property that was majority unburnt. About 2/3 of its 500 or so, 370 planted hectares, were spared by the fires of 2020. So it was a suitable property for the establishment of the sanctuary. If you look on the map, it's sort of slightly marooned off to the west of the estate, so it wasn't one that we were particularly focused on in terms of productivity and contributing to the scale of operations. And broadly speaking, we were happy to sell it. The sale price was at about book value, and we've made some ongoing commitments to support the sanctuary over time. That is largely through sort of harvest and just general support in terms of getting things done on the ground. The agreement provides for a harvest right to Kiland for about 2/3 of the trees. Revi will pay for the second third of that, and then the latter third really depends on whether we're still operating on the island. The sanctuary is their plan is essentially to sequentially clear the blue gums and re-establish native vegetation, but of course they have to do that step by step over time, so that the koalas both have somewhere to live while some of the land's cleared, and then those trees will become more mature. The koalas have somewhere to migrate to while the next area of blue gums is cleared. So that'll be a process over a number of years, and we've both offered to more generally, but also put into the contract a mechanism whereby we can support the sanctuary as it helps it get itself established. The sanctuary itself, as I say, it's a new charity. Their focus will initially be on straight conservation. Some of the principles of the charity koala researchers by profession, and so there'll be a substantial research component, and that will include how the population on Kangaroo Island can support mainland populations. And then over time, I think they'd like to also introduce some community activities and possibly some tourism activities over time, but that's a bit further down the track. But the initial purpose of the charity is really just to preserve the population of koalas that is in that estate. Which brings us to Revi. So Revi has been a bit slower than we would have liked for a combination of reasons, but most of them to do with logistics and getting on the island. We've had some also delays. We have to construct and operate a gas burning facility as a way to get the pyrolysis process going. There were some regulatory delays and alterations that required. But broadly speaking, we're due to start commissioning this week or next week. Commissioning itself is a 2-stage process. The dry commissioning is simply turning machines on and making sure the electricity gets to the right place and they operate in the manner they're supposed to. That's about a 2-week process. Wet commissioning follows that, and that is actually putting wood chip product through the machines and just to making sure all the particular aspects such as heat and pressure and mass flow all operate according to design. We have engaged Revi has engaged a independent contractor to help us through the commissioning process. So their work will be a complete review of the componentry and the integration as a system. And then they will also put a commissioning manager on site so that we have Revi has an independent person reporting directly to the company, ensure that all the various components and the system overall hits its nameplate specifications and expectations. We've also commenced a body of work. We would expect to be producing biochar in earnest around May, June. So we've commenced a body of work as to how we actually address physical biochar sales. There's a number of markets that we can pursue, and we will need to prioritise those. The early biochar, which will be fairly modest in volume, will go to the Kiland estate itself. Our contractor AAG is very kindly offered to also put it across their estate. Much of that early volume will be put into field trials so that we can verify the productivity and sort of farming improvement that biochar in the soil produces in different circumstances and different application rates. Our agronomist Daniel Pledge is working on the nature of those field trials at the moment, and we will have sort of independent verifiers, probably from one of the universities in Adelaide or Melbourne, help us with that work. On the carbon credit sales themselves, obviously, without having made biochar, without having actually made any product, we're not in a position to be selling credits, but we are in active negotiations with a number of buyers or some of the intermediaries that operate in the carbon removal space. And as the biochar starts being produced, I would expect further progress on that front. So look, they're the main areas I wanted to touch on today. Happy to take any questions, including on the agricultural side and sheep production, all of that sort of thing. But apart from that, I'll hand back to you, Jillian.
Yeah, let's proceed to the Q&A. This first question is for Alistair. What were the main drivers behind the results for the quarter?
Hi all. Yeah, reversion activities. That's the company's major focus at this stage, and certainly the expenditure on the reversion activities was the major driver, and that will continue to be for some time. We're tracking at about total reversion expenses about $3 million a quarter. I think that's probably enough. That answers the question. I mean, I'll touch on sheep sales and the other farming operations as they come into play more in the years to come. But at this stage, our focus is very much the reversion activities, and not only existing reversion activities, but a ramp up in them, as James touched on just before, in both resources that are applied to those reversion activities.
Okay, and another one for you, Alistair, on reversion. Could you explain the treatment of reversion costs from one quarter to the next?
Certainly. So, look, as I touched on, at the moment, we're tracking at about $3 million a quarter in total reversion costs. Now, what we then seek to do is exclude from these total costs those that are not directly related to harvest or land preparation activities, such as farming or building the flock. We then end up with a core of direct reversion costs, and they are capitalised to the balance sheet each 6-monthly statutory reporting period. So the reversion costs are incurred and recorded and reported on a quarterly basis, and then the capitalisation of the direct reversion costs takes place at the end of each 6 months. Following the capitalisation of the direct reversion costs, we then book any net increase in the independent valuation of the estate that's over and above the amount capitalised in reversion costs. So from the inception of the project in July 2022 to December 24, the end of the reporting period, the total reversion costs capitalised over that period were $18 million. Against that is the uplift in the independent valuation of the estate of $36 million. So I hope that explains the treatment of reversion costs. I might, whilst we're talking reversion costs, just share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see the final page of the shareholder update that includes the P&L and balance sheet for Kiland. if I can just bring people's attention to that reversion expenses line item there, that should show on a quarterly basis about 3 million in positive expenses, and then the whole amount reversed at the end of each half year. So for the half year, it's correctly reflected at 0, being the full amount for the half year, which was then capitalised up to the balance sheet and taken out of the P&L. The number for the December quarter there should be minus 2.9, and on the version that was distributed to shareholders on Friday, I believe that was shown as positive 2.9, so we'll be issuing a correction to that. But all the other numbers in the report are unchanged, all the totals are unchanged, and the balance sheet is unchanged. But whilst we're talking reversion expenses, I wanted to make mention of that incorrect sign on that December quarter value. But it does show, it means the reporting of the reversion expenses can be a bit lumpy from quarter to quarter. And as a result of that, I'm going to modify the treatment so that the actual capitalisation of reversion costs take place on a quarterly basis as well. And that'll smooth out those peaks and troughs that you may have noticed over the past sort of 6 to 12 months in that accounting treatment.
And just a final question that's come through as well for Alistair again. What is the timeline for completing the full transition from forestry to agriculture? And how will this impact financial performance in the next 12 to 24 months?
Look, that's a good one. At this stage, we are working towards a late calendar 2028 deadline for completion of the reversion activities. And we're monitoring progress against that deadline closely. So for the next couple of years, we'll continue apace with the reversion activities, heading towards that target of late 2028. And that will dominate the financials, those reversion activities. And likewise, touching on what James just said, probably even an increase in reversion activity expenditure over the coming quarters to reflect the additional crews that have been deployed to that exercise. So over the next 6 to 12 months, continue apace with the reversion activities and a very similar look and feel to the financials. Although you will start to notice in coming quarters the increased farm revenue as reversion activities are completed and the flock is expanded, there'll be additional sales coming online from both sale of wool and sale of lambs. And that'll become more and more significant in the years to come. But in the meantime, the reversion activities will be the primary focus and the primary driver of the financials.
Yes, thank you so much, Alistair. That concludes the Q&A session for today. So I want to thank you, James and Alistair, and all shareholders for joining today's call. As always, if you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email the company at any point. Their contact details are listed on the website. And that